Although few people are really aware of this, we are currently in a brand new space race, and this is something that I have said time and again on this channel, and yet for the most part, if you ask the average everyday person on the streets of New York or London or Paris, they would have absolutely no idea that this race was taking place. But the fact of the matter is, it's happening. The People's Republic of China is racing to achieve dominance in low Earth orbit and in cislunar space, and indeed throughout the entire solar system, and they are frankly winning. Whereas the Western world continues to delay mission after mission, the Chinese have completed multiple missions to the moon, including a sample return mission, and will have a brand new space station completed in low Earth orbit by the end of this year. Now, recently, the People's Republic of China released the details of a 5-year plan to exploit outer space and to establish dominance not only in low Earth orbit but beyond. And on the surface of things, it would seem that it's a very peaceful objective. Quote, "The space industry is a critical element of the overall national strategy, and China upholds the principle of exploration and utilization of outer space for peaceful purposes." However, in the third paragraph, they seem to contradict themselves. Quote, "In the next 5 years, China will integrate space science, technology, and applications while pursuing the new development philosophy, building a new development model, and meeting the requirements for high-quality development." Okay, that sounds harmless enough, but, quote, "It will start a new journey towards a space power." The rest of the plan is filled with language that indicates that China wishes to dominate the entire legal system when it comes to forming a space-based economy. Quote, "To promote law-based governance of the space industry, China will speed up the formulation of a national space law and establish a legal system with this law at the core. It will also include studying and formulating regulations on the management of satellite frequency and orbit resources, and strengthening the declaration, coordination, and registration of these resources to safeguard the country's legitimate rights and interests in this regard." So, what does China really intend to do? And more importantly, what can the Western world do to make sure that outer space does not become a new domain for the People's Republic of China to dominate? My name is Jordan Wright. I was born in the same year that the human race took its first steps on the surface of another world, and then we promptly betrayed those people's legacy by never going back. But now, over half a century later, there's a new breed of pioneers that are seeking to finish what these people set out to do so long ago. But there is trouble as well, so it's time for commentators like me to stop being polite and start getting angry. As most of us probably know, the People's Republic of China has achieved incredible results in space exploration in a very short amount of time. The Tiangong 1 Mars probe orbited and landed on Mars. The Zhurong Mars rover, and I may be mispronouncing this, explored the planet and left China's first mark there, and this is all according to their 5-year plan. China has achieved a leap from cislunar to interplanetary exploration, and all of that is absolutely true. And over the next 5 years, China's ambitions are expanding radically. They intend to launch the Chang'e 6 lunar probe to collect and bring back samples from the polar regions of the moon. The purpose for that is obvious. You want to bring back ice from these polar regions to determine how suitable this area of the moon is going to be for human habitation. On top of that, they're going to launch the Chang'e 7 lunar probe to perform a precise landing in the moon's polar regions and a hopping detection in lunar shadowed area. And of course, the shadowed area is where all the ice is. They're also going to complete research and development on the key technology of Chang'e 8 and work with other countries, international organizations, all of whom are allies of China, by the way, and partners to build an international research station on the moon. And then, of course, there's China's amazing progress when it comes to their space station. The launch of the Tiangong core module, according to the plan, marks a solid step in building China's space station. Of course, they don't mention the fact that the booster that deployed this particular module went crashing back to Earth, heedless of any possible damage that it might have caused. But let's move on. The Jiangzhou 2 and Tiangzhou 3 cargo spacecraft and the Shenzhou 12 and Shenzhou 13 manned spacecraft, together with the Tiangong core module to which they have docked, form an assembly and steady operation. All of this has already happened. 6 astronauts have worked in China's space station, performing extravehicular activities, in-orbit maintenance, and scientific experiments. In the next 5 years, China will continue to implement its manned spaceflight project, such as launch the Wenqiang and Menqiang experimental modules, the Xunqiang Space Telescope, the Shenzhou manned spacecraft, and the Tiangzhou cargo spacecraft. Complete China's space station and continue operations, build a space laboratory on board, and have astronauts on long-term assignments performing large-scale scientific experiments and maintenance, to continue studies and research on the plan for a human lunar landing, develop new generation manned spacecraft, and research key technologies to lay a foundation for exploring and developing cislunar space. Talk about ambitious. However, one thing that I find to be particularly interesting about the plan is it doesn't talk much about what's going to be happening on the space station aside from pure space science, and that makes no sense at all. Utilizing space stations and the microgravity environment that they provide is ideal in order to carry out unique fields of medical research, 3D printing of organs, creation of new types of biological organisms, including perhaps bioweapons, and on top of that, unique forms of manufacturing, new types of polycarbons, new types of body armor, new types of alloys for fighter planes, all kinds of new applications that can be manufactured in microgravity. The plan makes absolutely no mention of any of this, even for peaceful purposes. It completely avoids any discussion of this whatsoever, which I find to be a little bit disturbing. However, even when the plan uses vague language in order to describe China's long-term plans, their objectives become pretty clear. Quote, China aims to strengthen its space presence in an all-around manner, to enhance its capacity to better understand, freely access, efficiently use, and effectively manage space, to defend national security, lead self-reliance and self-improvement efforts in science and technology, and promote high-quality economic and social development, to advocate sound and efficient governance of outer space, and pioneer human progress, and to make a positive contribution to China's socialist modernization and to peace and progress for all humanity. It should therefore come as a surprise to no one that China intends to export the way they run their own country to the way they intend to run outer space, utilizing their modified socialist system that combines aggressive capitalism, strangely enough, with a socialist oligarchic type of government. Why should we expect them to handle things any differently in outer space? And any sort of international cooperation that they're talking about, well, they don't seem to include also accepting other types of governance, other political philosophies. There is no mention whatsoever of that anywhere in this plan. Instead, they talk about collaborating with other countries without any sort of tolerance for other political points of view. That should also be extremely disturbing. But what is also disturbing, along with being very impressive, is just how much the Chinese space program has accelerated in recent years. From 2016 until December of 2021, 207 launch missions were completed. The total launch attempts that the Chinese space program has undertaken in its entire history has been about 400. So more than half of China's launches have taken place over the last 5 years. That is simply unbelievable and also indicates just how rapidly this program is accelerating. And China's intention this year in 2022 is to launch more than 50 rockets with a total of over 100 spacecraft, 140 to be precise. And according to the 5-year plan, China's launch cadence will continue to accelerate. Quote, in the next 5 years, China will continue to improve the capacity and performance of its space transport system and move faster to upgrade launch vehicles. It will further expand the launch vehicle family, send into space new generation manned carrier rockets and high-thrust solid fuel carrier rockets, and speed up the research and development of heavy lift launch vehicles. It will continue to strengthen research into key technologies for reusable space transport systems. And all of us have seen their Starship clone, by the way, and conduct test flights accordingly. In response to the growing need for regular launches, China will develop new rocket engines, combined cycle propulsion, and upper stage technologies to improve its capacity to enter and return from space and make space entry and exit more efficient. Does that sound familiar? It sounds a hell of a lot like SpaceX, except they have the resources and revenues of an entire country to back them up. Another thing that troubles me is the wording that they use, or rather the language, when it comes to international relations in outer space. Quote, China's basic policies on international exchanges and cooperation are as follows: safeguarding the central role of the United Nations in managing outer space affairs, abiding by the Treaty on Principles governing the activity of states in the exploration and use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, upholding the guiding role of relevant UN principles, declarations, and resolutions, actively participating in the formulation of international rules regarding outer space, and promoting greater sustainability of space activities. Here's the problem with all of that fancy language. There aren't a lot of regulations when you're talking about managing outer space. That's the whole reason that NASA came up with the Artemis Accords, and the reason that so many countries signed the Artemis Accords. And one of the most important objectives of this treaty was, quote, affirming the importance of compliance with the Treaty on Principles governing the activities of states in the exploration and use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, as well as the agreement on the rescue of astronauts, the return of astronauts, and the return of objects objects launched into outer space, the Convention on International Liability for Damage Caused by Space Objects, and the Convention on Registration of Objects Launched into Outer Space, as well as the benefits of coordination via multilateral forums such as the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space to further efforts towards a global consensus on critical issues regarding space exploration and use. And yet, China refused to sign the Artemis Accords. If they are so committed to the things that they set out in this 5-year plan, then why did they have such a problem with the Artemis Accords? And for those of you who think that I'm being overly paranoid about this stuff, I would reference a conversation that I had with Sierra Space's cybersecurity specialist, the guy who heads up their firewall in defense against intrusions. Over 1 million attacks are made against Sierra Nevada Corporation every single day, and the vast majority of those are from the People's Republic of China. And every type of technology that Sierra Nevada has, from their space technology to their space station to their wide variety of military technologies, is under daily attack from the People's Republic of China. How does that kind of aggressive cyber warfare coincide with peaceful coexistence in outer space? It just doesn't. The People's Republic of China may not have declared war on the Western world, but they certainly have a Cold War going on that's every bit as hot and every bit as dangerous as the one that once raged with the Soviet Union back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. This is a frightening time in the history of our planet, and this is something that has been clearly recognized in a U.S. military threat assessment report. It reads, quote, "Beijing is working to match or exceed U.S. capabilities in space to gain the military, economic, and prestige benefits that Washington has accrued from space leadership. We expect a Chinese space station in low Earth orbit, well, that's already done, to be operational between 2022 and 2024. 2022 is actually the accurate date. China has also conducted and plans to conduct additional lunar exploration missions, and it intends to establish a robotic research station on the moon and later an intermittently crewed lunar base. The PLA will continue to integrate space services such as satellite reconnaissance and positioning, navigation and timing, and satellite communications into its weapons and command and control systems to erode the U.S. military's information advantage. Counter space operations will be integral to potential military campaigns by the PLA, and China has counter-space weapons capabilities intended to target U.S. and allied satellites. Beijing continues to train its military space elements and field new destructive and non-destructive ground and space-based anti-satellite weapons. China has already fielded ground-based ASAT weapons designed to destroy satellites in LEO and ground-based ASAT lasers probably intended to blind or damage sensitive space-based optical sensors on LEO satellites. And in case you have any doubts about the People's Republic of China's ambitions and their technological capabilities, have a look at this. This is a private company called Space Transportation. However, I would ask you to bear in mind that any private company in the People's Republic of China is completely at the disposal of the government to make use of their technology for any sorts of military purposes that they may have in the future. This is a completely reusable suborbital spacecraft that will allow passengers to travel from one side of the planet to another in 90 minutes. Pretty much the same thing as the Starship point-to-point application, but I find this particular design to be a lot more interesting simply because you don't need a huge area to be cleared for the most powerful powerful rocket in human history. Instead, you have two what appear to be solid rocket boosters that release the space plane, and then the solid rocket boosters return to base, or rather glide back for a safe landing, while the suborbital space plane travels to its destination. This is a very innovative design that's supposed to be completed by 2025, and if you think that that's far too aggressive and ambitious of a goal, keep in mind just how many things the Chinese have been able to accomplish in such a short amount of time. For example, building the largest highway network in the entire world since the 1980s, when they had no highway network whatsoever, or building a 55-story skyscraper in the space of a few weeks. It is unreal what this culture and what these people are capable of, and they should not be underestimated. And as you can see, this design is elegant, it is innovative, and it doesn't require a huge exclusion zone for vertical takeoff the same way that Starship would require. I think it's more practical, and personally, I think it makes China even more competitive when it comes to space transportation. While New Shepard is just taking people on bungee jump rides, this company could be taking folks on suborbital travel from one part of the planet to another in 90 minutes in just 3 years, making New Shepard a dinosaur overnight. And so, while space enthusiasts in the West become increasingly frustrated at the tiny fraction of federal budgets that get spent on space, the tiny amount of attention that's being paid to such an important issue, while the People's Republic of China are working overtime to dominate the whole thing, the chips are down, the die has been cast, and yet we don't seem to be responding, and it's time for the Western world to wake up or pay the consequences. If you like what I have to say, if you enjoy this type of commentary, please subscribe to my channel, and also check out the description for various ways to support me. So until the Western world does indeed wake up, until we realize that we are in a space race and the stakes are extremely high, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.